From an article in the Northwest Ruralite magazine, published by the Lane Electric Utility, Volume 11, Number 3, March 1964. Okie Real tells us of his life from the sandhills of Texas to Culp Creek, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. Okie Real had a lot of hard times in these parts, but it adds up to a good life. Me from Oklahoma? Okie dismissed the idea with a snort. I never was in Oklahoma in my life, except maybe passing through. When I first came out here, I went up to Harvest in Washington, and for some reason, I told him I was from Oklahoma. Later on, I was working at the vet's home in Roseburg and met up with this guy who had been up there with me. "There's old Oklahoma," he hollered. Okie allowed himself a grin of amusement. The name stuck. This information is probably the straight stuff. No doubt it is, but you never know for sure whether Okie is leading you down the trail to slaughter or whether it's for sure when he spins one of his stories. Or maybe it's just that he has such an interesting way of relating the ordinary. Today, Okie and Emma Real live a comfortable life on their 160-acre place near Culp Creek, feeding some cows, logging a little, traveling some, like to Hawaii or maybe Alaska, going to a grange or a Rotary meeting. But life certainly hasn't been that way for the two of them from the beginning. There's been a lot of scrabble at the bottom for something to eat, just about any way it could be gotten, and their experiences have ranged from the hilarious to the heartbreaking. In Okie Real's candid manner of expression, both he and Emma were born in Texas, in a small community between Dallas and Houston, and they ran away and got married in Centerville, Texas, 39 years ago. Right out on the street on Christmas Day, the Justice of Peace came right out on the street and gave us the verdict. Their first 3 years of married life, according to Okie, the young couple lived in the Sand Hills, farming with a pair of mules and a walking cultivator. We had one pair of shoes each. We kept them for going to dances. We plowed barefoot during the day. Okie frowned and thought, "Wish it was that way again." Real moved his wife and 2 babies to South Texas near Bay City on the Gulf, where he was doing all right until a storm came up with 13 inches of rain and 100-mile-an-hour winds to pile up his cotton crop just before it was ready to pick. The house was flooded. I carried my wife out on a gas barrel and came back to get the kiddies. They were floating around the room in a wash tub. It was 1929 and the Reals were on bedrock. They packed out in a Model T truck and landed in Bakersfield, California, where Okie and Emma picked cotton for 6 weeks, dragging the 2 children behind them in the field on sacks. That winter, they moved to Springfield, where Okie was hauling slabs to a mill when a tub of boiling water tipped and scalded the 2 of them. Without a stick of furniture to their name, they suffered their hurts on a mattress laid out on the floor. Dr. Pettyplace took care of us. It was his first year in practice. My crippled brother, Roma, came out from Texas and nursed us. He stayed on 12, 14 years and ran a shoe parlor in Springfield. After that, I bought him a house back in Texas and took care of him until he died. The guy that run the grocery store next door wouldn't give us any credit, wouldn't even let us use his phone. Okie shook his head. We didn't write home for 2 years. We told him we didn't have anything to tell him but trouble. And trouble wasn't over for Okie and the family. After recovering from their burns, Okie and Emma worked in the harvest in Washington, saved up $800 and headed for Peace River country in Canada to homestead. But they were turned back at the border. I told them I had $800 in a PA can, but they said that wasn't enough. Coming back, the brakes went out on the Model T, and they narrowly missed hitting a freight at Bonner's Ferry. While getting the truck fixed, Emma laid her purse and the $800 on the back of a nearby pickup, and only frantic telephone calls located the driver and the money. I was holding on to the gooseneck of that phone like I was going to choke it. They spent some time in Prosser by the simple solution of letting the truck take its own way when they came to the fork in the highway, one way to Hood River, the other to Yakima. The old Model T lost a transmission at Prosser. Another couple told them of a job which they took and stayed in Prosser for 2 years, working in the fruit and Okie on the highway. We lived fine that winter. We had our first house since we'd been in Texas. Emma smiled and added, I made 12 gallons of grape jelly. We lived on that, potatoes, and pork, and we got the rent free for watching a man's cabin. But fate still had a lick or two for the Reals. They had to leave Prosser, and he got a job helping out at the vet's home in Roseburg. While there, his house burned down, along with $90, every cent he had. The family lost all their clothes, and he was burned. That night, he couldn't sleep. Suddenly, at 2 a.m., he started laughing. Emma looked at him in shock. I told her things would have to be better. I was certain I had all my troubles behind me. Not quite. He and Emma ran a tavern in Sutherland for 3 years until it burned down. Then they operated a hotel there for 4 years, saved $1,400 till a slicker got a hold of me, and I put it in a gold mine. I lost everything. The Reals started over, working 18-hour days, selling hamburgers as big as your hat for a dime. In 1942 came the turning point for Okie Real. He started logging, and everything I tried turned to money. In 1945, his eyes went bad, but he kept doggedly on. But in 1950, he threw in the sponge and bought his ranch from Alvis Wicks near Culp Creek. I'd mashed both knees and broke both ankles, but when I busted my leg, I quit, just gave up. The Reals' 2 children are now grown. Hollis, their son, who runs a store at Looking Glass and is cutting timber, and a daughter, Mrs. Edna O'Brien, Yuba City. And there are 10 grandchildren to liven up the place for Grandma and Grandpa on visits. Okie and Emma, as we said, take a few trips these days. All seem to have their element of disaster for him. Last time to Alaska, we took the boat up the Inside Passage. They served 4 meals a day, and I was on a diet. I gained 5 pounds. Then there's that incident on the airplane coming home from Honolulu. Well, we'll forget that. And they visit Mrs. Real's folks back in Texas now and then. Yes, Okie admits, I have a little left, a sandwich, sort of. He thought back on those long, lean years of fighting, yes, fighting for a living, back during the Depression. You know, he said, if I hadn't gone broke in Texas, I would have still been there. And after I got over my heartbreaking experiences, I knew that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Recorded by William O'Brien, Saturday, November 7th, 2020.